There was something strange about the moment you almost ignored. Not the big moment, not the dramatic one, the small one, the one that felt insignificant when it happened, the one your mind tried to explain away. But for some reason, it stayed with you, and that's what I need to tell you about. Because after looking at everything, the delays, the disappointments, the waiting, the questions you never got answers to, I realized something. The sign you were waiting for may not have arrived the way you expected. It may have arrived disguised as something else. And if that's true, then what you've been calling bad timing might actually be the reason you're finally ready to understand it. I know that sounds strange, but stay with me. Because something about your journey stood out to me. You have spent a long time waiting, longer than most people realize. Not just waiting for an event, not just waiting for a relationship, not just waiting for an opportunity. You've been waiting for certainty, waiting for confirmation, waiting for that moment where life finally makes sense, where all the scattered pieces suddenly fit together. And if you're honest, there were moments when you almost gave up on finding it. You kept moving, you kept functioning, you kept smiling when people asked how you were doing. But deep down, there was a question that never completely left. What if I'm missing something? Not because you aren't intelligent, not because you haven't tried, but because some part of you has always felt like there was a hidden chapter nobody gave you, like everyone else received instructions that somehow never reached you. I think you felt that. I think you felt it more often than you admit. And here's the mystery. The people around you probably think you're doing fine, but they don't see the conversations you have with yourself. They don't see the moments when you stare at the ceiling at night, replaying old decisions. They don't see how often you wonder whether you're moving towards something meaningful or simply moving, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because human beings can survive uncertainty. What breaks us is meaningless uncertainty. When suffering has a purpose, people endure extraordinary things. When suffering feels random, even small burdens become heavy, and somewhere along your journey, a quiet fear began growing. What if all this waiting means nothing? What if there is no sign? What if there is no message? What if life is simply happening, and I'm trying to find meaning where none exists? It's a question many people carry. Few people say it out loud. But I noticed something fascinating. The people who ask that question most deeply are often the same people who are closest to discovering an answer. Not because they're smarter, because they're paying attention, and attention changes everything. Imagine two people walking through the same forest. One sees trees, the other notices tracks. One sees random movement, the other sees patterns. The forest hasn't changed, the observer has. And I think something similar has been happening in your life. Because if I asked you to describe the last few years honestly, I don't think you would describe them as easy. There were losses, maybe visible, maybe invisible. Some losses happen in public, others happen quietly. The loss of a dream, the loss of a version of yourself, the loss of certainty, the loss of someone you thought would stay, and those losses leave marks. Not always dramatic marks. Sometimes they leave questions. Questions that follow you longer than pain itself. Why did that happen? Why now? Why me? Why this way? The strange thing about questions is that they often survive longer than answers. Years can pass, circumstances change, life moves forward, yet certain questions remain frozen in place, waiting, just waiting. And that brings me to something I don't think you've noticed yet. The sign you've been waiting for may not be a future event. It may be the person you've become while waiting. I know. That's not the answer most people expect. Because we imagine signs as external. A message, a coincidence, a door opening, a phone call, a person arriving, a miracle appearing. But what if the first sign isn't outside you? What if it's inside you? Think about who you were 5 years ago. Maybe even 2 years ago. Look carefully. Not at your circumstances. At your heart. At your reactions. At your understanding. At what you tolerate. At what you no longer tolerate, at what matters to you now. Something changed, didn't it? And that's important because transformation often happens so gradually that we miss it while it's occurring. It's like watching a sunrise. No individual second feels dramatic, yet suddenly everything is illuminated. The darkness didn't disappear all at once. It disappeared one unnoticed degree at a time. I realized something recently while watching an old man sit alone in a train station. He wasn't doing anything remarkable. He simply sat there, calm, peaceful, unhurried. People rushed around him, carrying bags, answering phones, checking clocks. but he remained still. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't stop watching him. Eventually, I noticed why. He looked like someone who wasn't waiting anymore. Not because he had everything. Not because life was perfect. Because he trusted where he was. And that image stayed with me. Because most people spend their lives believing peace comes after certainty, after success, after answers, after signs. But what if peace arrives first? What if peace is the sign? That possibility changed something for me. Because I started noticing a pattern. The people who eventually discover what they were searching for often stop obsessing over finding it right before it arrives. Not because they quit, because they evolve. The desperate version of them fades. The fearful version softens. The grasping version relaxes. And suddenly they're able to see what was hidden before. Psychologists talk about something called selective attention. We see what we're prepared to see, which means two people can experience the exact same event and walk away with completely different realities. One sees rejection. One sees redirection. One sees an ending. One sees preparation. One sees evidence they're forgotten. One sees evidence they're growing. The event stays the same. Meaning changes, and meaning changes lives. Here's where the mystery deepens, because I don't think the sign you're looking for is trying to convince you of something new. I think it's trying to reveal something you've already felt, something you've sensed for a long time but never fully trusted, a quiet knowing, a subtle pull, a feeling that, despite everything that happened, your story isn't random. Have you ever noticed how certain moments refuse to leave you? Years pass, yet they remain vivid, a conversation, a glance, a dream, a sentence, a feeling. Why? Why those moments? Why not thousands of others? There's a reason human memory works this way. We remember emotionally significant experiences because they become anchors, markers, coordinates. And sometimes we don't understand why a memory matters until much later. A seed doesn't explain itself when it's planted, only when it grows. Maybe that's why certain experiences keep returning to your mind. Maybe they're unfinished messages, not messages from the outside, messages from a deeper part of yourself. The part that has been trying to get your attention for years, the part that knows you're capable of more than survival. Because somewhere along the way, survival became your focus. Just get through this week, just get through this month, just get through this season. And that's understandable. Life can be heavy, but people weren't made only to survive. They were made to become, to grow, to discover, to transform. And that transformation usually begins with recognition. Recognition that something is changing. Recognition that the old story no longer fits. Recognition that the waiting itself has been shaping you. Which brings me back to the beginning. The moment you almost ignored. What if it wasn't random? What if the reason it stayed with you is because it was the first crack in the wall, the first glimpse, the first whisper, the first indication that something larger was unfolding? Not a dramatic revelation, not lightning from the sky, something quieter, something more personal. The kind of sign only you would recognize. Because the most important signs rarely announce themselves. They reveal themselves slowly, patiently, almost invisibly, until one day you look back and realize they were there the entire time. And if that's true, then perhaps the reason you've been unable to stop searching isn't because you're lost. Perhaps it's because you're getting closer, closer than you've ever been before, closer than you think, closer than the version of you who almost gave up could possibly imagine. And the strangest part? The evidence may already be all around you. You just haven't seen the full picture yet. The question is, why now, and what changed that finally made the sign visible? That is where your story truly begins. I think you've misunderstood your loneliness. Not because you aren't self-aware, not because you haven't spent enough time thinking about it. Actually, the opposite. You've spent so much time trying to understand it that you've started believing the wrong story about it. And the wrong story sounds something like this. If I still feel this way, something must be missing. A person, an answer, a purpose, a breakthrough, a sign, something. But I need to tell you something I realized recently. There are two very different kinds of loneliness. Most people spend their entire lives confusing them. The first kind is the loneliness of absence. Someone left, something ended. A connection disappeared. That loneliness hurts, but it's understandable. The second kind is far more mysterious. It's the loneliness of becoming, and that's the one I think you've been experiencing. Because something about your journey doesn't feel empty. It feels unfinished. Those are not the same thing. An empty room feels abandoned. An unfinished room feels under construction. From the outside, they can look identical, but internally, they are completely different realities. And I think this distinction explains more about your life than you realize. Because when people are becoming someone new, they often feel disconnected from who they used to be before they feel connected to who they're becoming. It's a strange psychological space, a bridge between identities, a hallway between versions of yourself. And hallways are uncomfortable places to live. They're designed for transition, not permanence. Yet many people spend years there, wondering why they feel out of place, wondering why old environments no longer fit, wondering why conversations that once excited them now feel exhausting, wondering why they're surrounded by people and still feel alone. Maybe you've noticed this. Maybe you've sat in a room full of people and felt strangely distant. Not because anyone did anything wrong, not because you disliked them, because something inside you is changing faster than your environment, and that creates tension. Tension few people know how to explain. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as identity evolution. The moment your internal world begins outgrowing the structure built around your old self. But long before psychology gave it a name, people simply described it as feeling lost, which is interesting, because some forms of feeling lost are actually evidence of growth. Think about that. A tree doesn't feel comfortable while growing. Its roots stretch, its structure changes, its entire existence reorganizes itself. Growth is not always experienced as expansion. Sometimes it's experienced as confusion. And that's where another mystery begins. Because I don't think you've been waiting only for a sign. I think you've been waiting for permission. Permission to trust what you've already been sensing. Permission to believe you're not imagining it. Permission to stop dismissing every instinct you have. Permission to admit that maybe, just maybe, you're changing. I noticed something about people who constantly seek signs. They often struggle with trust, not trust in others, trust in themselves. They receive intuition, then question it. They notice patterns, then explain them away. They feel drawn toward something, then immediately talk themselves out of it. And after doing this repeatedly, they stop recognizing their own inner voice. Everything becomes second-guessed. Every decision becomes complicated. Every possibility becomes uncertain. Eventually, they don't know whether they're being cautious or simply afraid. I think you've felt this too, because you've learned how to survive disappointment. And survival strategies have consequences. One of the strangest consequences is that protection eventually starts looking like wisdom. You convince yourself you're being realistic, logical, careful. But beneath all those reasonable explanations is a deeper truth. You've been hurt before, and hurt changes perception. A child touches a hot stove once and becomes cautious. An adult trusts the wrong person enough times and becomes guarded. The mind learns, the heart remembers, and eventually both begin expecting repetition. That's how human beings are wired. We predict the future using the past, which sounds intelligent until the future begins offering something different. Then our predictions become prisons. And here's the part most people never realize. The very experiences that taught you caution may now be preventing recognition. Because signs rarely arrive looking safe. They arrive looking uncertain, unexpected, different. Which means if you're only willing to trust what feels familiar, you may miss exactly what you've been waiting for. That realization changed the way I understand timing. For years, I thought timing was about events. Now I think timing is about readiness. Imagine giving a complex book to a child. The words exist, the pages exist, the message exists. But the understanding doesn't, not yet. Nothing is wrong with the book. Nothing is wrong with the child. The timing simply isn't right. Years later, the exact same book becomes life-changing. Why? Because the reader changed. And what if the same thing is happening in your life? What if opportunities, connections, insights, and signs have been appearing for years? Not absent, present, but waiting for a version of you capable of recognizing them. That possibility explains something fascinating. It explains why people often say things like, "It was right in front of me the whole time," because sometimes it was. They simply weren't ready to see it. And before you dismiss that idea, think about your own experiences. How many lessons make sense now that once seemed confusing? How many warnings do you understand only in hindsight? How many moments reveal their meaning years later? Life does this constantly. The answer arrives long before the understanding. Which brings me to a story I can't stop thinking about. Years ago, a friend told me about a lighthouse keeper. Every night he climbed the same stairs, checked the same light, performed the same routine. Nothing seemed remarkable about his work. Night after night, year after year, until one stormy evening, a ship captain arrived and thanked him. The captain explained that during a violent storm, when visibility disappeared completely, that distant light became the only reason they found their way home. The lighthouse keeper was stunned, because, from his perspective, nothing extraordinary had happened. He had simply continued showing up. And that's when it struck me. Sometimes the most important transformations happen so gradually that the person experiencing them doesn't recognize their significance. The lighthouse doesn't know who it's guiding. It simply remains lit. I wonder how many things about yourself you've underestimated, how many strengths you've overlooked because they develop slowly, how many signs you've ignored because they appeared ordinary. Maybe resilience became normal to you. Maybe wisdom became normal. Maybe patience became normal. Maybe endurance became normal. But just because something feels normal doesn't mean it isn't remarkable. And I think this matters because self-worth is deeply connected to recognition, not recognition from others. Recognition of yourself. Most people wait their entire lives for someone else to validate what they already know, someone else to confirm they're enough, someone else to declare them worthy, someone else to tell them they're on the right path. But external validation is a fragile foundation because it constantly shifts. One compliment lifts you, one criticism crushes you, one success defines you, one failure destroys you. That's not stability, that's dependency. Real confidence grows differently. It grows when you learn to trust your own growth process, when you stop measuring your worth by immediate results, when you stop demanding proof every 5 minutes, when you stop treating every delay as rejection. And I think that's where your journey is leading. Toward trust, not blind trust, earned trust. The kind that develops after enough experiences force you to admit that not everything can be controlled. Not everything can be predicted. Not everything can be understood immediately. There is a deeper rhythm to life than certainty, and perhaps that's why you've been so drawn to the idea of a sign. Because signs suggest guidance, direction, meaning, the possibility that you're not wandering aimlessly. But here's the deeper truth. A sign only matters if you're willing to follow where it points. And that's where many people become stuck. They don't actually want a sign, they want a guarantee. A guarantee that everything will work. A guarantee that no pain will follow. A guarantee that they'll never regret the decision. A guarantee that certainty will replace faith. But life doesn't work that way. It never has. Every meaningful step requires trust before proof. Every relationship, every dream, every transformation, every calling, which creates another mystery. What if the sign you've been waiting for is not meant to eliminate uncertainty? What if it's meant to teach you how to move despite uncertainty? That possibility changes everything, because suddenly the goal isn't perfect clarity. The goal becomes courage. And courage is often misunderstood. People think courage means feeling confident. It doesn't. Courage means moving while still feeling afraid, moving while still having questions, moving while still lacking complete understanding. And perhaps that's why your waiting season has lasted so long. Not because you're forgotten, not because you're lost, because something essential has been developing beneath the surface. Something stronger than certainty, trust. The kind that survives unanswered questions, the kind that survives delays, the kind that survives silence, the kind that survives loneliness, the kind that survives becoming. Because the truth is, the version of you that began this journey could never carry what the future version of you is being prepared to receive. And if that's true, then the waiting was never punishment. It was preparation. The loneliness was never evidence of abandonment. It was evidence of transition. And the sign? The sign may be closer than ever now. Because for the first time, you're beginning to understand why you needed the journey before you could understand the message. And that understanding unlocks a question far more important than whether a sign exists. The real question is this: what exactly has the waiting been preparing you for? That answer changes everything. There is something I need to tell you, something that took me a long time to understand. The sign was never hidden from you. You were hidden from it, not physically, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes even spiritually. And before you reject that idea, think about how many times you've looked back at an old chapter of your life and suddenly understood something that was completely invisible while you were living it. The clues were there, The evidence was there, the meaning was there. You simply weren't. Not yet. I think that's what has been happening. Because the more I reflect on your journey, the more I noticed a pattern that appears in almost every human life. We spend years asking for answers while unknowingly avoiding the very truths those answers would reveal. And that's where everything begins to change. Because there comes a moment when the question is no longer, where is the sign? The question becomes, what if I've been misunderstanding the sign all along? That realization is uncomfortable, not because it's painful, because it's personal. It forces you to consider a possibility most people spend their lives avoiding. What if the thing you've been searching for externally has actually been trying to awaken internally? I know that sounds abstract, so let me explain. Imagine someone standing before a locked door. For years, they pray for the door to open. They wait, hope, beg, analyze, study, search for clues, wonder why nothing happens. Then one day they discover something shocking. The door was never locked. They were simply pushing when it needed to be pulled. The obstacle wasn't the door, it was the assumption. And assumptions are powerful things. They shape entire lives. Because once you believe something is true, you begin gathering evidence to support it. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every disappointment. If you believe you're forgotten, you'll notice every silence. If you believe you're behind in life, you'll notice everyone moving faster than you. The mind becomes a collector of proof. Not truth, proof. And there's a difference, because proof often follows belief, not reality, which leads to one of the most important psychological discoveries I've ever encountered. People rarely see life as it is, they see life as they are. Think about that for a moment. Two people can experience the same event. One feels rejected, one feels redirected, one feels abandoned. One feels protected, one sees loss, one sees transformation. What changed? Not the event, the observer. And somewhere along your journey, your perception began changing. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. The problem is that inner transformation doesn't feel dramatic when it's happening. It feels confusing. You begin questioning things you once accepted. You begin noticing patterns you once ignored. You begin feeling disconnected from old versions of yourself. At first, it feels like you're losing clarity. In reality, you're gaining depth. And depth changes everything. Because depth allows you to recognize a truth most people never discover. The sign was never about predicting the future. It was about revealing who you've become. That realization opened another mystery. Why are human beings so obsessed with signs in the first place? Why do we search for them? Why do we need them? Why does some part of us refuse to stop looking? The answer surprised me. It's not because we want information. It's because we want reassurance. We want to know we're not alone. We want to know our experiences matter. We want to know our suffering wasn't meaningless. We want to know there is a thread connecting the scattered moments of our lives. In other words, dot. We want to know our story means something. And if we're honest, that's the deeper question beneath every other question. Not what happens next, but does any of this matter? Because if life has meaning, then pain becomes bearable. If life has meaning, then waiting becomes purposeful. If life has meaning, then loss becomes part of a larger story rather than a random wound. And I think you've been searching for evidence of meaning. Not because you're weak, because you're human. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We can survive almost anything if we understand why. But uncertainty about meaning creates a unique kind of suffering, a suffering that's difficult to explain. Because it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like restlessness. Sometimes it looks like overthinking. Sometimes it looks like constantly searching for the next answer. Sometimes it looks like achievement without fulfillment. You accomplish something, feel satisfied for a moment, then immediately begin searching again. Another goal, another answer, another sign, another breakthrough. The cycle continues, and eventually a strange question emerges. What exactly am I searching for? I think you've asked that question, maybe not out loud, but somewhere deep inside. Because after enough years of searching, people eventually realize they're looking for something bigger than circumstances. They're looking for alignment, a feeling that their outer life and inner truth finally match. And that brings me to something that changed the way I understand signs forever. Several years ago, I watched a sculptor working on a massive block of stone. For hours, nothing seemed to happen. Dust fell, small pieces broke away. The stone looked almost unchanged. A passerby stopped and laughed. It doesn't look any different. The sculptor smiled. Then he said something I'll never forget. That's because you're looking at what's still there. I'm looking at what's leaving. Those words stayed with me, because transformation often works exactly that way. We focus on what hasn't happened. The sculptor focuses on what no longer belongs. And maybe that's the discovery you've been approaching. Maybe the sign isn't what entered your life. Maybe it's what left. The fear that once controlled you, the need for approval that once consumed you, the relationship that prevented your growth, the identity that no longer fit, the illusion you finally outgrew. What if the sign isn't addition? What if it's subtraction? That's when another realization appeared, one I wasn't expecting. Many people believe signs arrive to tell them where they're going, but often signs arrive to reveal what they must release first, because you can't carry everything into the next chapter. No one can. Growth demands surrender. Transformation demands space. And space is created through letting go, which is why certain endings feel so painful. Part of you senses they're necessary. Another part wants to keep holding on. That internal conflict creates enormous emotional tension. The mind argues, the heart resists, the soul knows. And for a while, all three pull in different directions. Maybe you felt that recently. Maybe there's something in your life you've already outgrown. A role, a belief, a fear, a version of yourself, something. And deep down, you know it. You know because every attempt to return to it feels increasingly unnatural. Like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. You can force it. But it never feels right. That's not failure. That's evolution. And evolution creates identity shifts. Identity shifts are fascinating because they happen before external evidence appears. First, you change internally. Then life begins reorganizing around that change, not the other way around, which means the most important transformation may already have happened. You just haven't seen its consequences yet. Think about that. The future you've been waiting for may already be in motion. Not because circumstances changed, because you changed. And that's where the deepest mystery finally begins revealing itself. The sign wasn't sent to tell you that your life is about to begin. Your life has already begun. The sign wasn't sent to confirm your worth. You were worthy before it arrived. The sign wasn't sent to create meaning. Meaning was present long before you recognized it. The sign came for a different reason, to help you see what has been true all along, that every challenge shaped you, every delay taught you, every loss refined you. Every unanswered question expanded you, every season prepared you, even the ones you hated, especially the ones you hated, because those seasons developed something success never could: depth, compassion, perspective, strength, wisdom, the qualities that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or inherited, the qualities that must be lived. And suddenly the waiting begins looking different, not easier, different. You stop seeing it as empty time. You start seeing it as construction. Invisible construction, the kind nobody applauds, the kind nobody notices, the kind that changes everything underneath before anything changes above, like roots growing beneath the soil. And perhaps that's why the sign finally became visible. Not because it suddenly appeared, because your eyes finally learned how to see it, which leads to the discovery that changes everything. The sign you've been waiting for was never proof that your future is coming. It was proof that you're finally ready for it. And once you understand that, a completely different question emerges. Not will it happen, not when will it happen, but something far more powerful. Who will you become when you stop waiting for permission to believe it? Because the answer to that question is where transformation truly begins. There is a moment in every person's life that looks insignificant from the outside. No applause, no dramatic music, no lightning striking the sky, nothing anyone else would notice. Yet everything changes there. Not because circumstances suddenly improve, because the person finally sees clearly. I think you're standing closer to that moment than you realize. And the strange part is that clarity rarely arrives the way people imagine. Most people think transformation feels like certainty. It doesn't. Transformation feels like recognition. The recognition that you've been carrying a story that no longer belongs to you. A story built old from fears, old disappointments, old assumptions, old versions of yourself. And for years that story felt true. Because at one point it was. But something happened while you were waiting. You changed. And now the story doesn't fit anymore. Imagine carrying a key in your pocket for years. Every day it travels with you. Every day it remains unnoticed. Then one afternoon you discover a door. And suddenly the key makes sense. The key wasn't useless before, the door simply hadn't appeared yet. I think many experiences in your life have been exactly like that. The lessons, the losses, the delays, the unanswered questions, the difficult conversations, the unexpected endings, the nights when you felt completely alone. You thought they were random pieces, but they weren't random, they were keys, and now you're beginning to see the doors they belong to. That's transformation, not becoming someone else. Understanding who you've been becoming all along. Because contrary to what many people believe, growth isn't addition. Growth is revelation. You don't become valuable. You discover value that was already there. You don't become worthy. You recognize worth that existed before you doubted it. You don't become enough. You realize you are measuring yourself with the wrong standard. And that realization changes everything. I need to tell you about something I noticed years ago. A friend invited me to watch a restoration project. An old abandoned cathedral stood in the center of a city. For decades, people walked past it believing it was ruined. The walls were damaged, the windows broken, the structure weathered by time. Most people saw decay. The restoration team saw something different, potential. They weren't focused on what had been damaged. They were focused on what remained. And that's what struck me. Because human beings are rarely taught to look at themselves that way. We become experts at identifying what's broken. We catalog flaws. We replay mistakes. We magnify weaknesses. Yet we overlook what survived. We overlook resilience. We overlook courage. We overlook the fact that despite everything life has thrown at us, we're still here. Still learning. Still hoping. Still searching. Still growing. Something about your journey reminds me of that cathedral. Not because you've been broken, because you've underestimated what remains. For too long, you've been measuring yourself by what didn't happen. The opportunity that disappeared, the relationship that ended, the dream that changed, the answer that never arrived, the timeline that unfolded differently than expected. But transformation begins when attention shifts, when you stop asking, "What did I lose?" and begin asking, "What survived?" That question reveals things you never noticed. Your ability to keep going, your ability to love after disappointment, your ability to trust again, your ability to hope despite evidence suggesting you shouldn't. Those qualities matter more than you know because they reveal something deeper. They reveal who you really are. And that brings us to one of the greatest misconceptions people carry about signs. People assume signs exist to change direction. Often they exist to confirm direction. There's a difference. Sometimes the sign isn't telling you to become someone new. It's telling you to trust the person you're becoming. Think about how much energy you've spent seeking certainty. How many times you've asked for confirmation. How many times you've wanted proof before taking a step. It's understandable. The unknown is uncomfortable. But eventually, every person reaches a crossroads. A place where additional information no longer helps. Only action does. And that's where transformation separates itself from understanding. Understanding changes thought. Transformation changes behavior. You can understand a truth for years without living it. Many people do. They understand they're worthy, but continue settling. They understand they're capable, but continue hiding. They understand they're growing, but continue doubting. Knowledge alone doesn't transform. Embodiment does. And I think that's the invitation appearing in your life now. Not simply to recognize the sign, to respond to it. Because every sign creates a choice. Every revelation creates responsibility. Every moment of clarity asks a question. Now that you see this, ... what will you do? That question can feel intimidating, but it doesn't need to be. Because transformation rarely requires dramatic action. Most life-changing decisions begin quietly. A conversation, a boundary, a commitment, a new belief, a small act of courage, something simple, something almost invisible, until time reveals its significance. I once heard a story about a ship leaving harbor. At departure, the captain adjusted the course by only a few degrees. No passenger noticed. The ocean looked exactly the same. The horizon remained unchanged. Nothing appeared different. Yet months later, the ship arrived on an entirely different continent. A few degrees changed everything. Life works that way too. The most important transformations are often directional, not dramatic, which means you may already be transforming more than you realize. Because transformation isn't measured by intensity, it's measured by alignment. And alignment creates peace. Not perfect peace, real peace. The kind that coexists with uncertainty. The kind that survives unanswered questions. the kind that remains even when life hasn't finished explaining itself. That's what I see happening here. You're beginning to trust something deeper than certainty, something deeper than outcomes, something deeper than immediate evidence. You're beginning to trust the journey itself. And that's important because trust changes how you interpret everything. A delay stops looking like rejection. A challenge stops looking like punishment. A detour stops looking like failure. Not because circumstances become easier, because perspective becomes wiser. The same event can feel completely different depending on the story attached to it. For years, you may have believed the waiting meant something was wrong. Now you're beginning to see it differently. The waiting was preparation. The loneliness was refinement. The uncertainty was development. The silence was space. Space necessary for something new to emerge. And here's the realization that changes everything. The sign you've been waiting for isn't pointing toward a future version of yourself. It's pointing toward the present one. Right now, this version. The version reading these words. The version that survived every chapter before this one. The version that kept searching, kept growing, kept questioning, kept moving, even when it would have been easier to stop. That's the person the sign has been revealing all along. Not who you'll become someday, who you already are. Because transformation doesn't begin when life finally changes. Transformation begins when you finally recognize yourself. And when that happens, something remarkable follows. You stop chasing validation. You stop demanding guarantees. You stop treating uncertainty like an enemy. You stop waiting for permission. Because you realize something profound. The thing you were searching for wasn't hiding from you. It was growing within you, quietly, patiently, throughout every season, throughout every disappointment, throughout every unanswered prayer, throughout every difficult lesson. The sign was never arriving, the sign was becoming. And now, for the first time, you're able to see it, which is why the waiting suddenly feels different, not finished, different. Because you're no longer standing at the beginning, wondering whether there's meaning ahead. You're standing in the middle, recognizing meaning has been here all along. And that recognition creates the final transformation. The shift from searching, to knowing, from questioning, to trusting, from waiting to living. The sign did not come to rescue you. It came to awaken you. And now that you're awake, there is only one thing left to understand. Not what the sign means, but why it appeared exactly when it did. And the answer to that question brings everything together. There is a reason the sign appeared now, not earlier, not later, now. Because this is the first version of you capable of understanding it. Years ago, you would have interpreted it differently. You would have seen only part of it. You would have asked it to prove something, fix something, guarantee something. But now, you see what it was always trying to show you. The sign was never evidence that life was finally beginning. Life has been happening the entire time. The sign was never proof that you were worthy. You were worthy before the waiting started. The sign was never confirmation that everything would work out exactly as planned. Because the deepest truths in life are not found in guarantees. They're found in trust. And trust is what this journey has been teaching you from the beginning. Every disappointment, every delay, every unanswered question, every unexpected turn, every season of loneliness, every moment of doubt. None of it was wasted, not because every experience was good. Some were painful, some were heartbreaking, some changed you forever. But even those moments carried something forward. A lesson, a strength, a wisdom, a depth, a compassion, a perspective that could not have been developed any other way. You thought you were waiting for a sign, but the truth is, the sign was waiting for you to become the person who could finally recognize it. And now you have, not because all the mysteries are solved, not because every question has an answer, not because the future is completely clear, but because something more important happened. You stopped looking at your life as a collection of disconnected events. You started seeing it as a story, your story. A story with meaning, a story with purpose, a story still unfolding. And perhaps that's the greatest sign of all. The quiet realization that nothing was random, that even the chapters you wanted to skip belonged in the book, that even the roads you never wanted to walk led you somewhere necessary, that even the waiting had a purpose, and suddenly the need for certainty fades. Not because you know everything, because you know enough. Enough to trust, enough to move forward, enough to believe, enough to live. So if you're wondering whether you finally found the sign you were waiting for, look at who you are now. Look at how you've grown. Look at what you've survived. Look at what you've learned. Look at the wisdom you carry. Look at the strength you didn't know you possessed. Look at the hope that somehow remained. There it is, not outside you, not ahead of you, not hidden somewhere in the future. Here. Now. The sign was never pointing toward a destination. It was revealing a truth. You were becoming the answer while you were waiting for one, and once you understand that, something inside you becomes quiet. Not because the journey is over, because you're finally at peace with it. And that peace is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of living it.